So yesterday we were looking at this halacha that basically states that if a person knows that he was robbed, but he doesn't know who robbed him, and the ganef is too embarrassed to go over to him directly and return the money. So there are a couple of remedies for that. Couple of remedies for that situation. One remedy is to if you're doing business dealings with him, like you're making purchases from him, just add money to the purchase. Or give it to another person who does business with him. And this will cause the person to realize that the money that was stolen from him has been restored. Another way to do this, and by the way, that's not always clear, because if a person is dealing with huge amounts of money, and he knows that he was robbed, and then you just cause him the money to come back, but it's not something that he would normally be aware of, so then you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. It's only if you cause the money to come back to him, like put it in his pocket where he had money, and when he counts the money in the near future, he'll come to realize that what was stolen from him was restored. That's where we say you fulfilled the mitzvah. That's what we were saying yesterday. Minyan shalom midas poter. That as long as he knows how much surplus he now has, even though he doesn't know where it came from, you have exempted yourself from the laws of Geneva. And then we said, but if you put it in a pocket of his where he normally doesn't keep money, so then he's not going to know how to protect that from loss or theft. So you haven't fulfilled your obligation until he actually discovers the money. And that was ad sheim tzaim ze bekiso. Vimnevdu kodem shematzam lo kiyem mitzvahs hasham. And therefore, if it gets lost before he discovers the money, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. And we made a distinction yesterday between whether the person is aware that he was robbed or he's not aware that he was robbed. So as we learned in the Imrei Yaakov Samach Aleph, Ad sheim tzaim ze bekiso, he says, V'chol zeh dafka heicha sheyadu habolim mehageneva. Up until now, we've been talking where the person knows that he's been robbed. Okay, and azarmina tzarech al kol panim minyan. Then we say that he needs to know that restitution has been made because he finds a surplus of cash in his pocket or in his register or whatever. Barak oz niftar mehachrayus, and then you're exempt. After Ika, it says, and even though there's an opinion that's contrary to that in the Gemara, we paskin, you don't have to notify him that you're the ganef as long as you make sure that he gets the money back. But then he said, Aval imlo yadu haba'olam mehagneva. But if the owner is completely unaware that he was robbed, then so the Shulchan Aruch says that as long as you put them back to where you stole them from, then you're yotze. I mean, assuming that it's a place that's well protected and that is not going to be stolen from a second time from somebody else. But in general, as long as you take what you stole and put it back, you've fulfilled your obligation to the owner. No harm, no foul, because you've made restitution. Okay, so that's where we were yesterday. There's a lot of discussion in the poskim, so all of these long commentaries in the Biurim really is taking up clarification of some of the primary sources, but it doesn't really change the bottom line halacha. Okay, so then we go to the next part of the seif, and he writes, "V'im meisa nigzal yachzir liyorshav." If a person stole from another person and then the victim died, so you should make restitution to his heirs. And the Imrei Yaakov writes, Im hagzela be'en, but that's only provided that the item that you stole is still intact. We're not talking about where you stole money, but rather where you stole, let's say, a specific finite object. Let's say, you stole a little statue or a piece of art from his house. V'im eina be'en o shenishtanet yachzir lahem dameha. But if the item is no longer intact, then you have to restore cash, the cash value, kishem shahaya machzir lemorisham, just like you would have been obligated to return the cash value to the person from whom you stole, the decedent. And like we said previously, you give back the cash value of what it was worth at the time of the theft, not any time later. And that was also, we said, because of takanas hashavim, that we don't require you, if there's been an appreciation in the object, we don't require you to pay what it's worth now, but rather what it was worth back then. Okay. Now, the last part is also very pertinent, and the Rav Shulchan Aruch states as follows: "V'hagozel es harabim ve'enu yodei lemi yachzir." Now, let's say a person steals from the masses, meaning that over the course of a long period of time, he has stolen from multiple people, and he doesn't even know who his victims are. Kagon hamochsim shenot lu yoser mikitzvasam shenasan lahem hamelech. A perfect example is a sheriff. Like in the story of Robin Hood, the sheriff of Nottingham. Why was the sheriff of Nottingham such a bad guy? I mean, he represented the law, right? So as the story goes, and this was the medieval practice, is that a king or a duke or a land baron would have rights of tax collection from all of the people who were living on his property. That's the way, what is it called? Feudal or something like that. I forget the specific terminology, but that's the way land ownership ran, is that you were granted permission to set up your farm on a land baron's land, provided that you paid regular taxes. Okay. And the land baron would often authorize a sheriff or a tax collector to go ahead and collect the taxes for him. He couldn't be bothered with it. And he gave the right for the sheriff to make sure that he collected the tax. And basically the sheriff was the law. And whatever he said, you had to surrender. But let's say the land baron required that everyone pay a certain amount, and the sheriff was skimming off the top. So he would tell people, you need to give me that plus. So he was supposed to only collect 100 from each person, and he collects 110 from each person, and he keeps the surplus for himself and gives whatever he owes to the land baron. So that person is a ganav, because he was never authorized to collect those taxes, and he just pocketed the surplus, exploiting the people that he had authority over. So that's why the sheriff of Nottingham was such a bad guy, because he was stealing from the poor much more than what the land tax actually was, and he was pocketing it. And so that's why Robin Hood is such a hero, because he would go ahead and take money from the sheriff's men. Okay, so let's say you're a Jew and you were appointed as a sheriff to be a tax collector, and you ended up stealing from the poor and taking more than you were entitled to take. And now you've taken from hundreds and hundreds of people, and you don't know even who to make restitution to. He says another illustration is if someone, again, is appointed as a sheriff to collect tax, but they want to be lenient on their family members to not require them to pay, but in order to fulfill their quota, they put pressure on others to pay more than their fair share. So there's an uneven collection of tax, there's an uneven taxation based upon who your friends are and who your family is. Okay, so that's another type of geneva, where you take more from some than you should. Shaharehem gazlanim gemurim. So these people are out and out gazlanim. V'chein memunei hakahal she'osim kema'asehem. And any kind of community appointee who does that kind of thing by making some people pay more and some people pay less, that's a form of gezela. And if a person does that, then tshuva so kasha, it's very hard for that person to do tshuva. Lefichach yasu tzarchei rab. And it's for that reason that you should, in other words, if a person wants to be Yotze Yidei Shemayim, like we said before, even though we had also said that the Chachamim made a takana that if a person wants to do tshuva, and it's very difficult for him to do so because it's been over years of crime, we don't accept the money from him, but this person wants to really do full tshuva. So what can he do? And here the problem is that even if he would be able to get the money, he still wouldn't know to whom to return all of the stolen items and all of the stolen money that he took. So one thing that our sages say is to do tzarchei rabin, take care of public works. Kagon lachpor be'eros mayim. He says, let's say, for example, to dig wells and to basically do civic beautification and civic improvement of the public works of the city. If you want to take care of the water supply, or you want to take care of the streets, or anything like that, as long as you pay for as much as your ability allows you to take care of the needs of the public, so then that's a form of restitution. It's not full restitution. And in this way, invariably, people that you stole from will be able to benefit from your efforts, and you're making at least partial restitution. Okay, it's not obviously it's not a perfect way of making restitution, but it's a start. It's something. Mikol makom osam anoshim shehem makirim shegazlu mehem chayavim lahachzir lahem. But this only works if you don't know at all from whom you stole. But let's say you know that you stole from a bunch of people, and there's one particular fellow that you remember that you actually had that pang of guilt when you took the extra money from his house because his wife was having a hard time, and there was a very meager existence, and so that one face lingers in your memory. He says that you have an obligation. If there's any specific people that you do remember, then you have to make full restitution to them. V'lo dai bameh shenehani mimei mehem. And it's not enough just because you dug a well and they're going to benefit from the well that you dug. That's not sufficient. And the same policy should be of trying to do public works as a form of penance should be imposed upon a person who is a different form of gazlan. He's not a thief, but he made loans to the members of his community on interest. He charged them interest, and because of that, even though he basically has ill-gotten gains, because you're not allowed to charge a fellow Jew interest. So how do you make good on? How do you do tshuva if you've done this over years to hundreds of different people and you don't know the identities of all the people that you've charged interest from? So one of the ways to make restitution is to do public works, like we just said. And this is discussed extensively in the Gemara in a couple of places, that I think we had seen this before, that doing public works is a form of tshuva when nothing else is possible. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Let's say you've stolen from multiple parties and you don't know to whom you can make restitution. So he says, "Umayri davka hecha she'en ikar asakav mizeh, da'az tzarch midina la'asos tzarche rabim." He says, we're talking about a person who it wasn't his primary occupation, and therefore that we're saying that he's obligated halachically to do this. Omari ba'ofen shahagzela kayemes, or where the stolen objects or the stolen property is still intact, and you don't know how to make restitution. He says, that's where we say that you're halachically obligated to make restitution and do public works. Dim eno kayim veikar asakav hayim migzela nisbar le'el siv zayin debazein tzarach lahachzir rak lotzeis yidei shemayim. Because as we've explained yesterday, that if your primary occupation was the sheriff of Nottingham, and the items that you've stolen are no longer intact, we said that we don't require you halachically to pay everything back, but only to help you fulfill your heavenly obligations to do tshuva. So really what the Imrei Yaakov is trying to point out is essentially suggesting, I'm not sure if I agree with his conclusion, that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is talking about a person who has specific finite objects that he's stolen, and he doesn't know how to make restitution of them because he doesn't know from whom he's taken these objects from. So then halachically, you have to convert these items into cash and then do public works with them. Or if you have an account of exactly how much you stole, so then you should take those amounts and convert them into public works. But if you were doing this habitually for years and this was your primary occupation, so then you only have to do this in order to fulfill your heavenly obligation, but not your halachic obligation. That's the point that he's trying to make. Shagam hanigzolim yehanu mehem, because invariably by doing public works, the people that you victimized will benefit from these efforts. When we call makom ein zeh tshuva haguna kidleil simin gimel sif tezayin ayin sham. But remember, this is not the highest level of tshuva. This is not a real tshuva, because invariably you're not going to be making good on the losses of every person that you've stolen from. So don't think that you can now become the tzaddik of the city just because you've done some public works with the money that you stole. So it's not really a full tshuva. When we call makom osan anashim shehem makirim v'chulei chayovim lahachzir lahem, but those people that you do know for a fact that you've stolen from them, so those people you have to, if you remember those individuals that you've stolen from, you do have to make sure that they are compensated. Umayri davka hecha she'eno ganav mifursam sheikar asakav bekach the im ikar asakav bekach kvar nispar b'sif zayin shetiknu chazal shelo lekabel mimenu k'di liftoach lo pesach sheyavu lasos tshuva ayin sham. But again, the Imrei Yaakov says we're talking about a guy who's not a famous ganav, who was not like a mafioso for his entire career, because there we've already said that the community should not accept that they shouldn't force him to make compensation. So you have this conflict, because on the one hand we made a takana because of takanas hashavim not to accept his efforts at restitution, and yet the Rav Shulchan Aruch is saying is that you still have to make restitution. So the Imrei Yaakov says that we're talking about two different cases. One is where the guy was a career thief, and here we're talking about where he's not a career thief. But the other way of explaining it, I'm not sure if he's got this right, because the other way of explaining it is that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is just trying to present to us the separate obligations of both the robber and the victims. The victim's obligation is once the guy comes forward and says he wishes to make restitution, they should tell him, we hereby exempt you. Now, if he still wants to, after that, to make restitution, to fulfill his heavenly obligation and to make himself good in the eyes of the Lord, then he should still return whatever he can. And as far as, so that's the way I would explain the beginning versus the end. Okay. And the same thing holds true with a person who lends money on interest. Bedavka im ein rov asakav mizekim avur biyardei simin kuf samech aleph siv zayin. And here too, he writes that this is again the obligation for him to make restitution is only if his main occupation was not in that kind of business. But if his main occupation for his whole career was for that kind of business, so then again, we're not going to obligate him to make restitution. Okay, so let me just. I'm just making a reference back to where he says that this is not a complete tshuva. Right. So if you just want to take a look at here, I'll bring it up for you. The original place where we saw this halacha of doing public works in order to make restitution, we had seen this halacha way back in Siman Gimel, and I'll just bring it up for you so that you can see it. Because there we were talking about a person who has corrupt weights and measures, and as a product of having bad weights and measures, he ends up stealing from the public. Let's just give me a sec. There we go. Okay, let me just share the screen here. Can everybody see this? Let's see. Let's say, so do you see Tes Zion over here? Kasha onshan shel midos umishkal yoser mishel arayos. The punishment for having false weights and measures, we had said, is a greater punishment than even committing sexual crimes. She'i efshar lemoded l'shokel sheker lashuv b'tshuva haguna. He says because it's impossible for the person who had perverse weights and measures, to do a full tshuva. Because when you steal from the public, there's no way to verify who you've stolen from. Because even though the rabbi said that you should take care of the needs of the public, right? When you're coming to do tshuva, when you stole from multiple parties, you can always do public works, and that would be a form of tshuva. Ein ze tshuva haguna, but it's not really a complete tshuva. It's basically, we're saying it's better than nothing. It's let a person redeem himself on some level. V'chayavim roshe hakol lahamid memunim shiyu machzirim ala chanuyos. And that's the reason why community leaders have to have sort of like a regulatory council that constantly and regularly goes to the different stores where they weigh goods for sale. And this regulatory council has to come down hard on people who have false weights and measures, because there's really no way to fix this kind of avera. And when let's see if the Imrei Yaakov is over here. Right. And basically the argument is that this kind of sin is very difficult to do tshuva for when you steal from the public, because like a sexual crime is between you and God, that you can make, you can do tshuva, because it's, there's no restitution that needs to be made to human beings. And so you can fix it by just doing tshuva on Yom Kippur or whenever it is, right? But with this kind of thing where restitution is necessary in order for you to make things right between you and Hashem, there's no way to do it completely correctly. Okay, so let me just go back to where we were. Let me see if there's any kutim over here. Okay, he quotes in the Likutim over here, he says, Ayin Imrei Yaakov shehivenu de'im lo yadu habola mehagneva bazein tzarech afilu minyan. He says, we explained in Imrei Yaakov that if the victim is not aware that he was robbed, then he doesn't even need to be notified that he's acquired a surplus in money that he wasn't expecting. Ela miyad shehachzirim l'makomam yatsa. But rather, as soon as you put the money back to where it was stolen from, you fulfilled your obligation. V'im yichado haba'olin makom lahachefetz v'ganvu shelo midas haba'olin. Now, let's say the owner had a specific object that he had designated a spot for where he keeps that object, and a person steals it without the owner knowing about it. V'achar kach hechziru l'makom acher l'rishus habolin, and the thief returns it, but does not put it back to the specific place where the owner usually kept it. L'kul alma ba'inan da'as. Ba'alim kevin shlachzir l'makom harishon v'yesh mistapkin bazeh. Then everyone would agree that you need to notify the owner. In other words, if you return, let's say he used to keep a piece of art on his wall, and you steal it off his wall, and then you're too embarrassed to sneak back into his house, or he installed security cameras, and now you can't put it back to where you stole it from, otherwise he's going to find out. So what you do is that you put it somewhere, or you leave it somewhere where he'll find it, but not at the original place. So you haven't fulfilled your obligation. If you do that, you would have to make sure that he gets a phone call or a note or something to make him aware that he can retrieve the item that was stolen from him. It's now at such and such a place. It's only after you do that that you fulfill your obligation of making restitution.
Rabbi, I presume you don't need to identify yourself. You just have to identify that it's there for him.
Correct. So this whole set of halachas is designed for the person who's too embarrassed to identify himself when he wishes to make restitution. And this is all part of what we call the takanas hashavim. We want to enable people to do tshuva for thievery, and therefore we go easy on not requiring a person to publicly humiliate himself, or to humiliate himself in front of his victim. As long as he can make restitution, we allow him to do so, provided that the owner is aware that the item that was stolen from him is restored. Okay. So that's the basic theme of this whole halacha. Okay. Good. We'll hold it here for today. Everyone,
I can think of a recent application, I guess, is bread companies who price fixed the bread, and then over years, and they have no idea who purchased the bread in the supermarkets over those years. So I think they just issued $25 gift certificates to whoever made a claim saying, I bought bread over the last decade or whatever. And so they weren't able to compensate each individual, right. But they did something that they were out money, and people felt like they were somehow righted by that wrong.
Interesting. Okay, I wasn't aware of this. When did this happen?
I think in the last year.
Oh, okay.
It was Weston, but a whole bunch of other big supermarkets and whatever that were charged with fixing.
Did you take advantage of this offer?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I mean,
So
I'm sure I bought bread over time, bagels and things with a hechsher. Um, not pastis roll, but still. And I felt that I was due that. And I guess they were helping
well,
to do this tshuva in a way.
just make sure you don't keep it over Pesach. So,
Right. Yeah, long time ago, Rabbi.
okay. Have a good day. We'll
But
see
I
you
suppose
tomorrow.
you could have a coupon for bread over Pesach as long as you don't have the physical bread.
I suppose you could.